from Holman is going to introduce our next group of speakers.
Well, we are glad that you are here. I retired after 50 years of pastoring and came to work for Matt Stiegel. What an adventure. He introduced me to Richmond Columbian Properties. In 2020, I went into the hospital with COVID and spent 40 days on a ventilator.
Oh, wow.
And before they life-flighted me to Indianapolis, Matt called me to see how I was doing. And a nurse was taking my vitals, and she recognized his name from the phone call. And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "Oh my Lord, you're not even dead yet, and the undertaker's She had great bedside manner. After getting off the ventilator, I ended up in rehab. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't breathe on my own, I couldn't swallow. And I had just started to talk, and Matt called me to see how I was doing again. And I said, "Hello." I said, "This is Matt Stiegel," really faintly. Here's what he said, him having the gift of mercy. He said, "Would you get your butt back to work?" And but shortly after that, he introduced me to the Richmond Columbian Properties, and I have so enjoyed working with those folks who serve on the board. They're an incredible group of people. And I sponsored an alley cat cleanup, and we had 60 people or so from the area, and our next alley cat cleanup is going to be on the 17th of June. I'm privileged to introduce the next folks who will be here, because one of the things as a pastor, you know, we're going to hear about apathy. And that's certainly an issue, an indifference. But one of the things as a guy who pastored, and as you came in, you met some beautiful young ladies who were a part of a rehab program called Crossroad. And that was a program that I helped start years ago. And one of the things as a pastor, you sort of draw the conclusion is, in order to change neighborhoods, you also got to change the hearts of people. Right. And only the Lord can do that. And Seth, Matt's son, introduced us to a program in Muncie that really has found an incredible balance. Matt went and visited him last week and came back and was so positive about the work that they are doing. And they are part of a group called the Urban Light Community Development Center, which is associated with the Urban Light Community Church. And we have the director of the Urban Light Community Center here, Joy Rediger. And then we have they call him the street pastor, because he's out in the neighborhoods. And they are doing an incredible job. This is Neil Kring and Joy Rediger, and would you make them feel welcome?
Thanks, Marty. I appreciate that. Neil and I are going to tag team a little bit, so I'm going to go first in the presentation. You know, just what you heard a little bit earlier, Neil and I are going to talk a little bit about this vein of conversation about connection with people. Of course, the restoration of places and people, and you'll see even in the work that we do, even spots of beauty and projects that are maybe on the street corner. Those are important, but connection to people is kind of the heartbeat of our organization. So again, my name is Joy Rediger. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Light Community Development. I've had the honor of being in that position for 5 years, but I've actually lived and breathed this work for about 20 years. I live where we're going to be talking about today. It's the only place I've lived in Muncie for the past 20 years. And so these stories are personal to me. These are my neighbors, the people I love, people that connect to my family as well. So Seth, if you could turn, before we talk a little bit about the organization itself, which is about 11 years old, I think it's important, if I could give you a 20-year history in about 2 minutes, I think it's important for you to see the scope of kind of the progression of where we are and even new things that we're doing in different neighborhoods, which Neil will talk about, and we're starting a little bit even within the organization as well. But you'll see the middle logo there, the small one, CCDA. It's actually a national organization. I'd encourage you to look it up if you are at all connected to a faith-based organization and today's talk connects with you. They're a wonderful organization that's, I don't know, 40 to 50 years old, that's been doing this context of holistic community development. And it was by a lot of their encouragement and learnings and trainings from them that many of us moved into the south side of Muncie 20 years ago. And south side of Muncie is historically underserved, forgotten, marginalized area of Muncie. And so it was part of their tenets of relocation, redistribution, reconciliation, raising up indigenous leaders, that holistic view, right, that helped us think about the context of our work. And so I'm not going to go in depth, but In and Out Cleaning Services is a for-profit business that was birthed out of this grassroots movement. Urban Light Community Church was established in 2005. My organization, Urban Light Community Development, in 2010. And even a charter school, Inspire Academy, was open in 2013. So you have a for-profit, nonprofit, a school, and a church, kind of all birthed out of this work. All separate organizations. Obviously, we're connected to each other and we support one another, but trying to holistically connect with the community on a holistic spectrum, if you will. Go ahead, Seth. You know, it's funny, I decided to put these pictures in. First, the quality of technology in 20 years is amazing, right? So these are 20-year-old pictures. But it's funny to me, this top picture specifically, what you probably can't see that well is us just playing with kids. And this picture is 20 years old. It was the first summer that many of us moved in. It's actually the spot of now our community garden, which you'll see pictures of in a minute. So it's even hard for me to, even though I'm in this picture, to even remember what that spot was like. But looking at these photos actually reminds me that we had no idea what we were doing. When I look at those young faces, my 20-year-old face, I'm 43 now, when I look at that face now, I'm like, man, it was like the Wild West. We had no idea what we were doing, except that we knew we loved our neighbors and that we were connected to our neighborhood. And as Matt indicated earlier, their broken sidewalks became our broken sidewalks. Their joys became our joys, and so on. And I also briefly want to mention, we're going to talk about some fun things and some restorative stories in a minute, but I think it also is a good reminder, looking at these yesterday, that these first few years were actually really difficult. This was new to us, and this idea of connecting and living among and really building that community also meant a lot of the hardships. And I think about a couple of my neighbors, Bob and Tammy, whose son unfortunately chose to commit suicide, and remember them weeping on the sidewalk next to my house. Or I remember the first summer that we'd gotten to know really a family with 6 young children, and finding out the night before that the young girl had been sexually assaulted. And just the blow of those things kind of almost knocked us off course. But we still chose to stick it out and have those relationships and ups and downs, so we can actually tell the whole story. This work is work of a marathon, not a sprint. And just like any relationships, there are difficulties and hardships as well, but also lots of joys, which I'll be able to share in just a minute. Go ahead, Seth. So again, it's our mission to really seek and develop healthy, thriving communities. That's our overall mission of our organization. But the key point in our mission statement is by joining with our neighbors. We are not an organization that's interested in coming in and doing work for, but making sure that we're doing work with and alongside our neighbors. And you see in our vision statement this phrase, mutually supportive. That's imperative to me. that as an organization that I am also learning from my neighbors just as much as I'm maybe giving space or funding or literal physical things for my neighbors to engage in. But this idea that I'm learning and listening and that they are a part of that work along the way is incredibly important. Good. All right, so this is kind of our 3 focus areas: neighborhood engagement, housing revitalization, and the lighthouse. And I'm not going to spend tons of time on the lighthouse today. What I do want to say about that, though, is a recovery home, actually very similar to Crossroads here in the Richmond area. We did revitalize the house that it's in, so that's one of our housing projects in 2016-17. And it's a longer, intentional, 3-phase program. Women are with us when they graduate for an average of 10 months, but it can be shorter or longer depending on each lady. But what I want to say about that, most about that, is that there are times when I talk to communities about being a CDC, a Community Development Corporation, which is actually a tax identification. There's CDCs everywhere, right? Sometimes I get a funny look that we have this portion of addiction recovery in our work. And what I'll say is that if we didn't have it, I would say that we'd be missing something. Because in the south side of Muncie, probably very much like Richmond or all of Muncie, I might argue, addiction issues are real and they touch point almost everybody I'm around with. And so if we're going to be a community development corporation, we should be reflecting the needs and what makes that community healthy and thriving, right back to our mission statement. And so to ignore addiction recovery, I think would be a misstep. And so that's an important part of our work. And matter of fact, we should keep, not only have a recovery home, but keep talking about the spectrum of addiction in our community and how we can be a part of it. So let me go into neighborhood engagement and housing a little bit more. Go ahead, Seth. All right, so I'm not going to read all that. It's a lot of words, but neighborhood engagement, the heartbeat, I would say, of our organization. I tell people all the time that we could be a decent housing developer, we could run a really great recovery home, but as a community development corporation, if we don't have this piece of what I call neighborhood engagement, resident listening, then we're really not a community development corporation. This is the heartbeat of what we do, and I intentionally leave this area pretty broad. And so we intentionally created a resident listening initiative in 2019. Spent our reach in neighborhood engagement has touch points in 3 different neighborhoods on the south side of Muncie. So we intentionally spent time literally going out to neighborhoods and listening, intentionally going to neighborhood associations, honoring the good work that they've already been doing, listening to them. And then trying to figure out if there's ways that we can come alongside neighbors, whether that be advocacy, whether that be actual projects, and so on. 2 tangible projects we'll see pictures of in a second is a South Central Community Garden. Community gardens are not easy to run. What I'm proud about this garden is that we've had it actually for almost 15 years, and it's had different leaders along the way. But right now we have, you'll see her picture, a resident of South Central is a garden coordinator. We have a garden team, and they actually get stipends, right? So we believe that the neighbors that are engaged deserve a monetary compensation, right? So it's certainly not a job, but we honor the work that they're doing and are able through grants to give them stipends along the way. The other program I just want to highlight real quick is called the Industry Mowing Program. And again, not that I get real excited about mowing, but the reason I like this is because from resident listening in the industry neighborhood, you guys might understand this in Richmond. Actually, let me back up the story. So in the late 90s, in that particular neighborhood, so many homes were demolished. To the point now, I had an urban planning class do some research on the neighborhood. Just this neighborhood in Muncie has 345 vacant lots equaling 48 acres. So if you could think about if just the majority of them were unmowed or uncared for, what that does to the morale or care of the neighborhood, from the tall grass to animals to trash, whatever that might be. So neighbors were specifically saying this affects the way we live, our quality of life. And so we created a mowing program where neighbors actually care for, sponsor, adopt, whatever word you want to use. And again, we're able to give them a decent stipend for them to care for that lot. And the response has been amazing, to the point this year when I went back to that group of people and said, all right, how many lots are we going to go for this year? They said all of them. They do not want a single vacant, blighted lot in their neighborhood. And I believe we're going to do it, which is pretty exciting. Go ahead, Seth. So again, just some pictures. So this is the South Central Community Garden. If you ever come to Muncie, I'd love to give you a walking tour. It is not a huge garden in terms of production, but what it is a space of gathering. We have picnic table, we have a fireplace, we have play equipment for the kids that you see in the back. And the most exciting thing about it is, of course, the people. Go ahead, Seth. Oh, sorry, before I show you the people, I wanted to also show you a beautification project. So the other thing in the industry neighborhood that we heard is that they felt like a neighborhood that had been forgotten. This is a historically African-American neighborhood. There are 2 historic segregated African-American neighborhoods in Muncie. Industry neighborhood is one of them. And so we are able to obtain this corner lot, and again, not too exciting on the slide, but this is a landscape design, and we're currently in the fundraising phase of creating a beautiful gateway project that's completely engaged with neighbors. They're deciding what the sign looks like, they're deciding what the landscaping looks like, but it's basically a place for them to put a stake in the ground and say, we're not going to be forgotten, and this is going to be a beautiful place for neighbors to themselves be welcome to, but also to welcome other people as well. Go ahead. Okay, so again, connecting to people. So in the middle picture is Donna, my neighbor, and if you would come to my neighborhood, you would see that she has the most beautiful yard, her personal yard, in the neighborhood. And so what I love about her being the garden coordinator is that it is specifically she's able to leverage her gifts and talents, right? Her personal passion, gifts and talents for the whole neighborhood. And she does an amazing job of connecting with other neighbors to have a garden team where they water, they weed, they're fully engaged in the work. And this is an open community garden. So if you came, you'd be welcome to pick all the vegetables and fruit too. So this is not like you would have a plot and I would have a plot. It's completely open to the neighbors around it. And then these gentlemen mowing are just some of the great folks that have gotten engaged in the neighborhood. Troy, who's sitting on the mower, would tell you that he loved the neighborhood, but he didn't know how to get engaged. And so the mowing program is exactly the way that he's now become engaged. He's now coming to different types of leadership opportunities. This year, he's actually going to now get youth involved into the program. The other picture is a couple of a dad and a youth who are doing the work together, and he's actually, the son is now creating his own business. It's actually an incorporated business this year. So it's excited to see neighbors engage and then move it on to the youth just beyond themselves and their families. All right, just quickly about housing. So we're a small housing nonprofit in Muncie. We're certainly not as big as maybe like our Muncie Habitat affiliate. We typically can do 1 renovation a year. We do things, we are what we call, we try to approach it in a mixed income development approach, meaning that we try to alternate our years between homeownership opportunities and affordable rentals. We intentionally do that because that's what we've heard from neighbors that they want. And we also believe that it's healthy for the neighborhood. If you just totally, again, we're far from gentrification in our area, but again, on an example, if you flood a neighborhood with fair market housing, you're going to get gentrification. But if you also flood it with only affordable housing, you can also create a pocket of poverty. And so this idea of mixed income housing development is a national, it's not something that we've made up, it's a national initiative, this idea of creating balance within a neighborhood when it comes to safe, affordable housing, both on a home ownership end, but also affordable housing too. And then of course we've renovated the Lighthouse, which is a recovery home again. Go ahead, Seth. Again, just a few pictures. So this is an affordable rental. This was actually, as maybe had been indicated earlier, a home that had been split up into a quad, and we took it back to the original duplex. And so this is actually a really large building. Each apartment is 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath. The square footage of one of the apartments is actually larger than my house. So they're large apartments. And we were thankful through some federal funding and some local funding to be able to do this. And I think 2017, 2018 was this renovation. Go ahead, Seth. Just across the street, again, we try to alternate if acquisition allows. So again, the blue house was an affordable rental. So this is a home ownership opportunity that was right across the house. And I was sharing with Matt and Seth last week when we did the walking tour. I specifically wanted this property for a couple different reasons. I wanted to make a dent in this corner of my neighborhood because not a lot of work had been done on the north side. But also when we took the tour of this house to decide if we wanted to purchase it, an out-of-state landlord was trying to rent it, and there was literally water in the HVAC system, like in the you could see the the water making the sagging of in the ducts. And so I also wanted this because I didn't want him to be a landlord in my neighborhood anymore, right? We often talk about maybe trying to get rid of some people that we don't want, and he was specifically somebody who I didn't want to be a landlord in my neighborhood anymore. And so I probably paid a little more in acquisition than I probably should have or wanted to, but it was important for me to get this home and to see it restored. And the nice, wonderful thing about this house is actually I was able to sell it to a young man named Shavon Nevings, who's a young man who grew up in our neighborhood, right? So he's a young man that grew up in our neighborhood. Many of us mentored and cared and loved for him. And now he is a homeowner caring for his family as well. Go ahead, Seth. All right, this is the last one. I'll have Neil come up. This is a story. This is our last renovation, just this last year. And what I love about this story is the people connected to this story. And so the homeowner, she just purchased this home in January, Erica with her kids, talking about that holistic spectrum, if you will. So she was a resident of the Lighthouse, a recovery home, and graduated in 2017. Addictions had caused her life to kind of spiral out of control. Had landed herself in jail a couple of different times, and actually the hospital a couple of different times because of the addictions, what it had done to her body. But she was able to achieve recovery, find recovery, actually then rented from us in our affordable rentals, intentionally with the idea of becoming stable, obtaining a safe, stable place for her children, but also working toward becoming mortgage ready and knowing that home ownership was a goal for her. And so after 3 years of being able to rent from us, then turned around and became a homeowner and was able to purchase one of our renovations. And so it's just a beautiful story of her own restoration, but being able to stay within the community that she had found home and connection to, which helped her recovery, but to also reinvest as well. And by the way, she actually works at In-N-Out Cleaning, if you remember, was one of those first businesses that I pointed out. So she's connected, is actually the operating manager now at that for-profit business as well. And then I just want to mention real quickly, which I think is important, is this family. This kind of gentleman in the back, Dr. Keith Miller. So he served as our volunteer housing renovation director for 10 years. This was his last project with us. And I want to mention him because I think he has such a unique story. He is a retired orthopedic surgeon, a man of faith, and it felt like God had called him to retire early. Woodworking was kind of his personal hobby and passion. He's certainly not a general contractor, but that's what he served. He's kind of served as our volunteer general contractor. And he committed to renovating 10 homes in 10 years. And so I just tell that story too, just as I go to different communities, because maybe that could spark something in Richmond. As you think about the coalition of maybe even churches coming together, this idea of creating maybe a CDC together. Everybody has gifts and talents they can leverage. And Dr. Miller chose to use 10 years of his retirement to leverage to helping change a community, using his natural gift and talents or his interest in restoration of homes to physically change the neighborhood, but also to bring home ownership and recovery and safe, affordable rentals to many, many folks. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Neil. He's going to talk a little bit more of street engagement of neighbors as well.
Okay. You can go to that first slide. Back in 2016, the Guardian newspaper came to Muncie, and they did this amazing story about ideas and thinking that led to political beliefs that were kind of guiding the perspectives of people in Muncie during the election. And in addition to that, they took all these amazing pictures and published them. And this actually is a picture that if you could see through the bushes, you would see the house where I live. And this was the parking lot at the old GM plant for the people who had non-GM cars, had to park in that lot. And the rest of the lot, which is now a brownfield, sits abandoned across the street. And if you go to the next slide, here's a couple more of the pictures that they took of Muncie. And those pictures, of course, are of places that tell a story about people. This morning in Muncie, which I'm sure is probably similar to this morning in Richmond, there were numerous people who collected their belongings, stuffed them into backpacks, and climbed out the window of abandoned houses and buildings like this. And they do it before the sun comes up to keep from alerting neighbors and law enforcement of their presence in these spaces. And if they're not noticed, this might be a place to be able to come back to tonight. Maybe they used heroin to stay warm or alcohol to dull the pain. This pain that is created in places of being alone, of being pushed aside and not wanted. While others, maybe someone's brother, someone's daughter, pack themselves into trap houses, finding a corner in a room on a carpet with other people, shooting up, smoking, all types of other using that happens in these spaces. But at least there, someone is okay with them being there. Not just trap houses and abandoned houses, but in the woods and old warehouses and under bridges and in backyard sheds and garages. That's what's happening in my neighborhood. My name, as you mentioned, is Neil Kring, and I'm actually in recovery from being a bad neighbor. I have lived in Muncie for 30 plus years, and it hasn't been until the past 6 years or so that I have known people who are living and dying in these spaces on Muncie's south side. I was a campus pastor at Ball State for about 28 years, and I just didn't know people who lived in neighborhoods that were really less than a mile away from where I lived. In my backyard a couple of years ago, Joy and I and some neighbors, some friends who work in some organizations and folks who are currently on the streets, we had a conversation together. We sat down in a circle, and I don't remember who asked the question, but the question was, what's the hardest part about living on the streets? And I do remember the answers. Not being able to rest, never feeling safe, having your stuff constantly stolen, never being able to get a good night's sleep. As a person of faith, specifically as a Christian, I can't help but ask the question or wonder the question, what does God think about all of this? Not like we're probably really going to know. And I understand we may not all ask those kinds of questions. But where is Jesus among the abandoned houses and the trap houses and the spaces that many folks are calling home in our communities? And as I've gotten to know people and gotten to see actually what is happening in many of these communities, I found that Jesus is actually there. God is there, offering presence and friendship to those who are on the margins, like he always has, to those who've been intentionally left out, to those who, because of the particular challenges that they face, the rest of us might look their way and say, there is no space for you, which is something that Jesus was very familiar with. There's no space for you. Sometimes a gal, I'll call her S, she comes and sleeps under the pine tree next to the church that is right by my house. C, he walks the streets and alleyways laughing and cursing and talking to himself. J, G, and T, they've busted out a lot of windows in our neighborhoods, trying to get an adult to look their way and pay attention to them. T rides a bike through the streets and looks for treasures and trash cans to try to keep her anxious thoughts from completely overwhelming her. And what do we say? Well, it's probably the same thing that we have always said to these kinds of folks. Unfortunately, we say, there's no space for you. Your problems are too complicated for us, too challenging to even know how to begin engaging, too complex, too costly, whatever it might be. And it's not just unhoused folks in our community. It's also those who are living in substandard housing, and those without jobs, and those without a high school education, and those who have mental health issues, but who are also unable to access mental health services that would meet them where they're at, and kids who don't have enough food for developing brains, and those without transportation, and those who can't pay their utility bills or electric bills. There is a pervasive trauma that comes with living in under-resourced places. And of course, many of us may be even familiar with the research on that. In our neighborhood, the life expectancy of kids who are at the local elementary school is 68 years old. On the other side of the railroad tracks, in other elementary schools, the life expectancy is 79 years old. And these are struggles, of course, that our neighbors, many of the ones that Joy has known for the years that she's lived in her community, they have faced these issues for a very long time. Last year, some of my neighbors, these were folks with their own mental health issues and their addiction struggles, started meeting together on Sunday afternoons. And it wasn't for a recovery meeting, but it was the beginnings of an experiment. And the experiment was to see if these folks, if we together had the power to actually do something about all the overdose deaths in our neighborhood. Really all over the south side of Muncie, but we were kind of starting right there in the neighborhood where I live. We were all tired of seeing neighbors carried out on stretchers, having overdosed and died from pills and heroin and fentanyl. So every Sunday afternoon we talked and we voted together on ideas, and we researched and we invited experts, and we organized ourselves as best as a bunch of people on Muncie's south side knew how to do. And we organized ourselves into community action. We raised our voices to the city, to healthcare providers, and we pleaded with them to do the right thing, to provide health-based addiction services located on the south side of Muncie. We even did the research, and we made the decision for them about what kind of health-based service too. We told them to start with a 24-hour crisis center that would meet folks right in the middle of their addiction and mental health struggles. A place where they could stay until they get the next referral that they need to move toward health. And we heard all the arguments from doctors, from people at the hospital, and from city officials. How are we going to keep a place like that open? Or do we really have that much need for that kind of a service? Or how will we fix the roads if we devote resources to this? Or how complicated is this going to become? And my neighbors, some of whom don't even read, some don't read very well, looked city officials in the eye and said, this is going to work. And neighbors like Cindy said things like, if I had a place to go when it was in the middle of COVID and I was suicidal, I wouldn't have had to drive all the way to Community North in Indianapolis just to get some help to stay alive. Other neighbors told stories of friends and relatives who had died, and family members who had overdosed, and needles in the park, and folks with mental health struggles, and no caseworkers or counselors or psychiatrists. And my neighbors said things like, No one has done shit about this, which is, sorry for my language, that's street pastor language, for no one has cared for the past 25 years since all of this has been going on to whole neighborhoods in Muncie that have been left without the resources to deal with the problems that these communities are facing. But somehow in 2021, my neighbors found their voices. And they spoke at Muncie's City Council meeting last summer. Actually, I think I have a picture of us this is us right before we went into the City Council meeting, and then others joined in, and we spoke, and City Council members listened. They didn't really say this, but I don't think they realized how bad things had been for so long. Those same people burst into applause after my neighbors told their stories. Poor people, meth addicts, homeless people, heroin users, felons, white trash, crazy people, drug dealers, crime-ridden neighborhoods, alcoholics, those are the kinds of labels, and also labels that come with a certain type of stigma, which basically says unwanted. There's no place for you. We have no idea as cities and communities, even service organizations and nonprofits that are meant to serve these folks, often no idea what to do to engage and to help. And I can tell you what I've learned specifically over these last several years as I've served as a neighborhood pastor and as a community organizer in this neighborhood. And I've learned this from my neighbors. And I learned it from Jesus, who entered into the neighborhood. Some people say he came down from heaven. I say he came to live in the neighborhood, to show us neighborliness. If you're a person of faith, it wouldn't come as a surprise that Jesus said like this: love your neighbor as yourself. Other faith traditions may say it differently, but it's the same message. Love both people who are like you and people who are different from you, which of course is a lot harder. But you can't do that if you don't know the names of people, and you don't shop in the same places, and you don't spend time together over food, and occupy the same spaces and share the same struggles and walk with each other in the same communities. It's why my family ended up moving into this neighborhood, Thomas Park, Avondale neighborhood on Muncie's South Side, to just be with neighbors, to feel in some way, even though our privileges probably protect us from so much of this, but to feel the pain of gun violence in the neighborhood, and drug dealers and neighbors tweaking on the sidewalks, and kids on the streets, and people looking for enough food for their families, and bearing the weight of the mental health struggles in our community. If we want to develop communities that thrive, we have to be in those neighborhoods that are not thriving. We have to walk together. I mean, folks like Joy have taught me that, and Josh and Lindsay and Danny and Pat and so many others. And Jesus, ultimately, I think is the one who has showed me this. If you go back one slide, this is a neighborhood meal that we started about 6 years ago on the corner of 10th and Sampson Street. And everything that we have done in our little pocket of the world, in our little neighborhood, has developed out of friendships that we made at this meal. We started a bike shop for kids. We have done community organizing for addiction services. We have an anger management class for kids. We have a new neighborhood association. We've done neighborhood cleanups, a community garden, housing revitalization, food distribution, training and certifying neighbors as peer recovery coaches. We've done funeral meals for homeless folks who OD and pass away. We have embedded community health workers who are coming to our neighborhood, a new health clinic. We have naloxone boxes, a new coffee shop, a corner store, mental health resources available to neighbors, a harm reduction street outreach team, and a lot of other things that all developed from sitting across from each other at tables and sharing a meal every Thursday at 5 o'clock outside the lawn of this little church in this little place that probably would have shut their doors about 5 years ago because everyone had gotten so old. And but then they developed the idea of starting to look at the neighborhood around them and say, how can we be with people together? Jose brought his brother over to my backyard, and he wanted to talk about the conditions at the place where he works. Because he's Mexican, his boss expects him to get up on roofs that are too unsafe for the salesman to even walk on them to give estimates. They don't fix the brakes on the trailers they use to haul materials. When they go out of town for jobs, they're promised hotels, but then the guys who are running the crews have to pay for the hotels. They don't give time off if a guy is sick. And what does his boss say about all of this? If someone complains about it, they say, it's okay, you're Mexicans. You're used to it. You're lucky to have a job. If someone pushes back or tries to advocate for themselves, they fire the whole crew, and then they go find a whole new crew, which is why he didn't want me to go with him to talk to his boss. And this happens in our county, in Delaware County. Some of my neighbors are getting exploited. And I said, how can I help? What can I do? He said, I just needed to talk to someone. I just needed to tell somebody. I was like, I'll go with you. He was like, no, I don't want you to go with me. I just want you to listen, to just be present. I have a backyard with chairs, and we can sit and talk. There are girls that are living in homes supplied by landlords so that they can come over and bring their friends over for sex. They give them drugs. The girls get abused. How do I know this? Because some of these gals come over to the church hungry and strung out. Sometimes they're sitting on the street corners with trash bags full of their clothes and their stuff. And we sit down together and eat on folding chairs in the grass or at tables in the basement on styrofoam plates, and we talk. A while back, a gal in her 20s was pacing around back behind the church, and she was on something. All of her stuff was in boxes and bags. And I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I come over to this church when I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. It's peaceful over here. I asked her if she had a place to stay that night, and she said, no, I don't. She said, but I'm going to figure something out. And I said, how can I help? What can I do? And she said, don't call the police on me to get me to leave. When the best that you have to offer a neighbor is just not calling on the police, on a person who has nowhere to stay, who's tweaking and needs some mental and emotional peace, anyone can do something meaningful just by being there. So we connect people with things like food and places to sleep for the night, and people and places that'll take the time to help my neighbors get their IDs back and help them get connected to mental health care and get signed up for insurance and connect them to jobs and unemployment services and drive neighbors to rehab centers in other counties because we don't have that many beds in Delaware County. Just to help people get help without getting arrested. That's a lot of what I do. And that is what the Spirit is doing in under-resourced neighborhoods in Muncie. Neighborliness on an individual level is crucial. But it's also, neighborliness is also working to create structures and systems that work for people. Instead of saying we have no place for you, we create places that work. Before I close, I want to mention, sometime in May, I want you to turn your ears toward Muncie. I don't know when this is going to happen, but I want you to listen for an announcement about what the city of Muncie and one of the major healthcare providers are going to do on the south side. They're going to announce the creation, a partnership between the city and this healthcare provider for a 24-hour crisis center. And if you hear that announcement, I want you to think of my neighbors, some of whom live without running water in their homes. who persuaded city officials and healthcare providers and held them accountable to do the right thing. And they had to convince them it would work, who took trips like this one where we all went down to Eskenazi Assessment and Intervention Center in Indianapolis to show people that this could happen. One of the most skeptical people in this group was one of the physicians that went with us. There were doctors, judges, city council people, pastors, neighbors, and we all kind of went together to explore this thing. And one of the most skeptical people was a doctor. And at the very end of this tour that we took, we ran out of time because we were just all having such a good time. And I asked him, I kind of put him on the spot. I said, we'll just have this guy, close us off. And he said, after what I experienced today, something like this fills in all of the gaps of what we're missing in our community. And I was so glad he said that, not something else. But and from then on out, it started happening. And my neighbors, the people who were concerned about folks that were overdosing and dying, showed the city how to use their resources and the profits that they come up with, these nonprofits that actually have tons of profits for healthcare services, and to find grants to do the right thing and how to be neighborly. So, and of course, in our neighborhood, and I'm sure yours, we need a lot more of this. So thanks for having us here. Yep. I don't know, do we have any time for questions, or does anyone have any questions for Joy? Or Joy is better at answering questions than I am, so.
Are all these ideas on your website or somewhere so we can follow up?
Yeah, most of what I talked about would be on the website. Neil, probably not so much what Neil does, because he's such on the street level. What would be the best way to connect with you? Maybe just get your number afterwards, Neil? Or?
Yeah, probably. We work, Joy's my boss, so I work for the Urban Light CDC, and I work together with her in the couple of neighborhoods where she's at, and also in the neighborhood where I live. And but we also have a lot of other associations. There's a community revitalization coalition that we work with called the 812 Coalition, and there's just lots of strange, weird associations that we have to do to kind of make these things happen in our community. Yeah.
Has the university made any offer to help or partner with you?
Yeah, we have, Joy, you could talk about the immersive learning class that you had.
Yeah, I think we engage with Ball State in various ways. I think what Neil was just indicating. So in our housing work, actually for many years now, we've been able to partner with the School of Construction Management, and they've been able to create all of our designs, which helps us in terms of architectural fees and designs for those types of things. There's lots of times we have interns, whether that be a neighborhood engagement or the lighthouse, and those types of things. In terms of, if you're talking about like big leverage of money and dollars, we have lots of conversations, right? They're certainly at the table a lot of times, but they're probably more, our partnerships have looked more like students coming in and learning is what it's looked like, yeah.
We've recently had some Ball State professors who've started writing grants for some of the things that we're doing in our neighborhoods too, which has been helpful.
It seems like the neighborly thing for them to do.
Totally.
That's right.
Totally. It's hard for people to be neighborly if they don't know the neighbors, though. I think that sometimes is the struggle. And even though Ball State is 1.3 miles from my house, it feels like a completely different world. Yeah. You had a question back here.
You had a corporate neighbor in Willard. It's one of the largest employers in Muncie, to be quite honest with you. And the gentleman who runs that corporation also sits over as an advisor for solid waste under Riddiger. So I know that area well. I actually had somebody break into the warehouse that was there, and the only thing that was missing with millions of dollars of parts laying around was food from the vending machine.
Yeah.
That's all they took.
Yeah.
So I know your area very well, so if you have a corporate partner, you probably should be reaching out to in that area because they're probably familiar over there with the local rent and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So probably talk to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
What connection do you have? I saw in your Urban Life Community Church, but if you mentioned it, it was very brief and I missed it. How do you affiliate with the actual church?
Yeah. So, so Urban Life Community Church was the first organization that was birthed, and then Urban Life CDC was birthed after that. So my office is literally inside the church, but we are separate organizations. It's actually a fairly common model in urban type settings where you might have a church that creates a separate nonprofit because it's much easier to do all those things that we just talked about through a CDC compared to a church because of grants and funding and government funding and all that kind of stuff. So we're strong partners. Some of the churches are on my board, and I actually attend Urban Life Church. Neil does not, but we're all well connected. Yeah.
So a follow-up on that, CCDA that you mentioned earlier, could you tell me what, I assume community development, but what's the first C of the last name?
Sure. Christian Community Development Association is what that stands for. Again, national organization. And they're really, again, because they're national, their purview is really training and equipping organizations like what I'm doing. Yeah.
Approximately how big, I'm sorry, I keep adding.
Yeah.
Approximately how large is Urban Life Community Church, or was it when you spawned this? I'm trying to get an idea.
Sure. Yeah. So we created Urban Life Community Church. So it didn't exist until we created it. So we literally started in a garage, moved to our local parks, one of the park cabins. We then were in our Boys and Girls Club gym for a while, and then actually United Methodist Church donated the building that we're currently in now. And that's a good question. I'm awful with numbers. I don't know. On a given Sunday with kids, we probably have 150, 175 is probably, so we're not a huge church by any means.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, great things you're doing. I really appreciate what you're doing. But I guess my question is, I like what you had about the mowing the vacant lots and keeping those clean. Do you find that community engagement also motivates the neighbors to keep their own property clean as well?
Yes, I absolutely. Again, that work that we're doing in the industry neighborhood, which is where the mowing is, that's so new. I mean, that's literally, we're only in the third year of that. But I can already hear from neighbors the appreciation of it happening. I live in the South Central neighborhood, which is just adjacent to that. And I can tell you, after doing this work, which is historically where we've done our housing work, that we already see neighbors caring for their housing differently, or the upkeep, beautification projects, and so on. And so I would say it's not an immediate effect. I want to be really honest about that. As a neighbor, it's not like the second year we started doing things, all of a sudden everybody jumped on board. It took a few years for that to happen, but certainly we've seen that effect. Yeah.
Do anything else to motivate that to happen? Because that's an issue, within neighborhoods that some people don't take care of their property.
Yeah, I think we could probably talk about lots of different initiatives that we do. Actually, Neil indicated there's a coalition in our area called the 812 Coalition, lots of partners, residents coming together. There's a really neat program called Small Sparks. So it's like a mini grant program where residents are literally given money, and it's this idea of anything you can do to better your neighborhood. So if it's a landscaping in front of your house, that's great. If it's a different project, last year there was a youth that did painting on sidewalks. She did a great, beautiful job. So there's different, I think, ways you could spark that. Just got to be creative and think outside the box. Yeah.
Yep. And there, in the neighborhood that Joy is in, if you saw their neighborhood 20 years ago from what it is, it's completely different. A lot of the work in the neighborhood where I live is newer. There has not been as much neighborhood revitalization work happening for very long there. So it's in the slow process of starting to see some change. And
Does Muncie or the county, anyone give any dollars for paint up, fix up, or anything that helps put some dollars into the program to get it going? And then my second question is, when you in a neighborhood, do you tend to target a street Or do you just as the houses come up, what's your methodology for that?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think your first question, the mowing program, is actually a great example. So as I indicated, this is our third year trying to do the mowing program. But the first year, we only had 5 lots adopted. The stipend was $75. And we heard directly back from neighbors, man, it's just not enough. And so we honored that. So we went after grant funding and city funding. So each neighbor actually gets $250 for each lot that they adopt. And last year, the mayor gave some of what's called edit funds, economic development funds, to kind of get that going. And then our goal last year was to have 25 lots adopted. Neighbors really showed up, and 43 lots were adopted. And to see that response, the city actually, our building commissioner in our city is the one who runs our mowing program. It's actually fully funding the program. So we just got $15,000 from our building commissioner's budget to fully fund that mowing program. So again, it takes time. It takes them seeing the neighbors engaged in that. But yes, our city did respond to that. And then a little bit about the strategy. Yes, I mean, we try our best to have a strategy, right? When it comes to housing, I try to really be very strategic about the areas, the blocks that we did. And then in terms of neighborhood engagement, as I indicated, we're starting to do some of that newer work in the neighborhood con industry, and we are trying to be a little bit more strategic. There's a certain street and block that is kind of historic, it's well known in that neighborhood, and that's where we're choosing. That's where that neighborhood gateway project. So that's kind of going to be the starting point, and we're going to move down that street, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Joy and Neil, I had heard a couple of years ago that Ball State was connecting themselves a lot to the education, public education up there.
Yeah.
And I was kind of wondering how you link into that with your work for the different neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And how if the kids aren't getting to school, or if the kids aren't getting what they need, how do you interface, or do you interface with that?
Yeah, we have a elementary school in our neighborhood that's between both of our neighborhoods. And it is one of the elementary schools that is struggling the most in Muncie. And I have built a great relationship with the principal. And so I actually go into the school once a week and hang out with kids in the classroom and get to know them, because we see each other then out in the neighborhoods, and then I've gotten to know a lot of their parents through that. And that's how we started this anger management course that we're doing. We're doing it for 4th through 6th grade kids. And last night we did one, and we had like 30 kids show up for it. So, but we're paying them to show up. If kids show up, they get $5. If you bring your parent gets $20. If you bring an older sibling, they get $10. And so trying to incentivize like mental health, and then we just try to find money to fund it. And so we have found money, and then one of the ladies who has doctoral students, actually from IU Richmond here, her doctoral students are in the school, and she's actually the one who's facilitating the course. So we just find ways to connect with some of the things that the school are doing, and the A12 Coalition has been a big part of giving money to the schools and finding grants that could help them meet kids and families where they're at, and teachers as well. So we just try to figure out ways to connect with the needs and develop relationships. Yeah.
What relationship do you have with the other churches in Muncie?
Yeah, I think pretty good relationships. This is, everyone is interested in this kind of work, but not many people are engaged in this kind of work. So we just bring people down into the neighborhood and kind of show them what's happening, show them, introduce them to neighbors, kind of invite them into the work. Joy does walking tours. We do walking tours over in our neighborhood. We do stuff together between both of our neighborhoods. And then there are some particular churches that now are starting to invest resources of people time, money. We have other churches that come in and prepare neighborhood meals for us, and then they spend time with neighbors as well. So slowly building that kind of connection with some of the other church communities of people that we know. So, yeah.
Yes, what would you point, that's happening in Muncie, what would you point to, like other cities like Richmond, to have similar types of lawn mowing services and fixing up properties and neighborhoods that need similar focuses like that? Is there anything that you would point to people here wanting to try to get similar type of things started? How to get that going?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I guess there's a couple things that come to my mind. I think about, and Neil can talk about this, but I think about just, again, that sitting down over a meal, and I know that might sound silly, but having a neighborhood meeting over food, I think, is essential, where you're actually literally breaking bread together and doing that consistently, and making that a time that you're really listening. Because my mind also goes to that resident listening initiative. We wouldn't be doing some of those things in our industry neighborhood if we hadn't been listening and directly responding to what neighbors said, right? I had never thought about creating a mowing program, ever. It's not something I woke up one day wanting to do, but it's exactly what neighbors wanted, and so that's what we responded to. And so that intentional sitting down, and it's slow work of building a relationship and connecting and listening. And then my second thought, I think, is that idea of a coalition. And so, I don't know what that looks like here in Richmond. If it's a coalition of churches, is it a coalition of nonprofits, is it both together? Because residents, as Neil indicated by his story of advocacy, often need a space together, but a space also then to know that they have the power, that their voice has power. And so that conduit or space sometimes does need to be filled by a nonprofit or an organization or a church, things like that.
And you don't know of any particular entity that of that?
In Richmond here? No.
I do not.
Yeah, we're not super familiar with. They're nothing like that, yeah.
Could I hijack for just a second? I'm sorry. I'm Sherry Markley, and I am the outreach coordinator at Centerville Christian Church, and we are trying to do these sorts of things. So if I can be so bold as to just say my email, please email me if you're interested, because I know this room has people that care and would like to do that. So I'm sorry I'm hijacking you, but my name is Sherry, SHARI, at centervillechurch.com. And I would love to hear from anybody that would like to coordinate with us. We already have a great coordination started in Centerville, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Awesome, that's great. That's what I hope today's would spur on, is the idea of what would this look like in Richmond. So that's great.
And we have the benefit of, we can team up with anybody.
I'm coming to visit you. You just-
Yeah. I'm a pastor and kind of like operate in a sort of parish model. So the whole neighborhood is my church. They don't even know they're in my church, but because they live there, we're connected together. But that means whoever they are and wherever they're coming from, we can be a part of it together. Or whatever other organization wants to join in, we can do that together. It doesn't have to be faith-based. It doesn't have to be, and a lot of our connections aren't connected with faith-based work. But we just try to figure out ways to do it together. So.
I was thinking also, I know this past Easter, Pastor Holman and I and other members of the church went door to door, and you really get a lot. It seems like since COVID and just over the years, this whole theme is apathy, and people, we need to embrace, we need to connect, we need to just get out and just love people in a certain way and invite people. And I really, it was really refreshing to me to just be able to get out in my own neighborhood and just pass something out appropriate to what we're trying to let people know. Can we help you? Do you need help to get this done? Or whatever it may be, but maybe having a group, like she was saying, get together and find out how we can outreach And if every church, and then ultimately contact every church with maybe a model of what we may devise or put together and say, can we just take a few cards and each church go out with the purpose we have in mind to connect together in bringing up our area, our communities, where the church is at, and even tell pastors that's an excellent way of building membership or have other people come into the church, because the church should go out and bring people in,
And one of the unique challenges, I know we're probably out of time here. One of the unique challenges of churches is that often they're kind of stuck in their own agendas. And when you're doing neighborhood work, you have to be on the agenda of the people in the neighborhood. And so allowing neighborhoods to define the types of things that we can put money and resources and connection and friendship connected to is very important. And that can sometimes be a hard thing for churches to adjust and adapt to that kind of thinking. So, but we're all just trying to figure it out. So thanks for having us. Yeah.